We all went through school, and most of us were probably told the same story, that it's this great ladder of opportunity, right? A place where if you just work hard, you can go anywhere. But what if that's not the whole picture? What if school is less like a ladder and more like a sorting hat, quietly nudging us right back into the social class we started in? Okay, let's dive into this really powerful Marxist critique of education. So let's just start with that big question. I want you to think back for a second. Was your school really a place where every single person had an equal shot? Or did it kind of feel like it was preparing different people for very different kinds of futures? That's really the central puzzle we're going to try and unpack here. All right, so our first stop takes us back to 1976 to this landmark study called Schooling in Capitalist America by two guys named Samuel Willis and Herbert Gentis. And they put forward a pretty radical idea. What if schools aren't really about learning? What if they're basically just factories designed to churn out the perfect workforce for a capitalist economy? Now, the absolute core of their argument is something they called the Correspondence Principle. It sounds kind of academic, but the idea is actually super simple and honestly pretty powerful. It's that everything about how a school is organized, from the hierarchy to the bells to the daily routine, it all directly mirrors the world of work. And you can see exactly what they meant right here. Think about it. The obedience you're taught to show a teacher, well, that's perfect practice for being obedient to a manager. That school bell ringing all day long, it's basically training you for the factory whistle or clocking in at the office. Even the way we're pushed to work for grades, an external reward, is a dead ringer for being motivated by a paycheck. It's an almost perfect parallel. So how does the school actually do this? Bowles and Gintis said it happens through something called the hidden curriculum. Now, this isn't the stuff you see in textbooks like math or history. No, this is all about the unwritten rules of the game. It's where you learn to show up on time, to accept authority without asking too many questions, and to compete against your classmates. All of which, you have to admit, are pretty perfect traits for a good subordinate employee. And here's the real kicker. Bowles and Gentis actually found that personality traits, things like being docile, compliant, and obedient, were better predictors of a person's future success than their actual grades were. So their argument is that the system isn't really designed to foster brilliant, creative minds. It's designed to produce a workforce that's easy to manage. Okay, so that's a pretty bleak top-down view, isn't it? It almost makes students sound like passive little robots just taking orders. But come on, we all know that's not true. What about the rebels? The kids who sat at the back of the class and messed around. What happens when students just refuse to play along? And that exact question is where our story takes a really interesting turn. Just 1 year later, in 1977, a sociologist named Paul Willis published a book called Learning to Labor, and he looked at this exact question. But not from the top down, he looked at it from the bottom up. See, Willis did things differently. He didn't use big surveys or statistics. Nope. He literally just spent 18 months hanging out with this group of 12 working-class boys that he called the lads. And these boys, they had their own thing going on. A counter-school culture. They thought school was a total joke, they cared way more about having a laugh than doing homework, and they completely rejected any form of school authority. But here is where things get wild. Willis uncovered this massive, paradoxical twist. Let's walk through it. So step 1, the lads reject everything school stands for. Step 2, because of that, they mess around, they don't get any qualifications. Step 3, this means the only jobs available to them are manual labor jobs, like working in a factory. And step 4, in the end, their big act of rebellion ironically lands them in the exact working class jobs that the system, according to Bowles and Gentis, needed to fill all along. How crazy is that? It's this incredible, ironic twist. As Willis basically put it, by actively choosing to fail, by rejecting what the school was offering, they were perfectly preparing themselves for life on the shop floor. Their own culture, their own choices, ended up leading to the exact same outcome. So, where does that leave us? We've got Bowles and Gintis on one side, saying it's the system structure that imposes inequality on everyone. And then we've got Willis on the other, saying no, it's the students' own culture and choices that lead them there. It feels like a total contradiction. Who's right? Well, what if they're both kind of right? This is where the work of the brilliant French sociologist Pierre Bordeau becomes so important. He offers a third way, a kind of synthesis that connects those big abstract structures with our individual cultures and choices. Bourdieu's first key idea is something called cultural capital. Don't let the name scare you. The easiest way to think about it is like an unwritten social currency. It's not about money. It's about knowing how to talk properly, what books you're supposed to have read, what art you're supposed to like, all the kinds of knowledge and tastes that schools, which are usually run by the middle class, just naturally understand and reward. His second big concept is habitus. Now, this one's a little trickier, but the best way I've heard it described is your feel for the game. It's all the ingrained habits, the skills, the ways of thinking that you just absorb from your family and neighborhood growing up. It's what makes certain life paths feel natural and possible for you, while others feel completely alien. And this is the masterstroke. This is how Bourdieu connects all the dots. He's saying, yes, of course, students make choices. Willis's lads proved that. But, and this is a huge but, those choices are not made in a vacuum. They are deeply shaped or structured by their habitus, which of course comes from their class background. So let's just lay it all out here to see how it fits. You've got Bowles and Gintis, who see students as basically passive pawns of the system. Then you've got Willis, who sees them as active rebels making their own choices. And then Bourdieu comes in and bridges that gap perfectly. He says, yes, students are active agents, but their choices are profoundly structured by the cultural capital they have, or don't have, and the habitus they've grown up with. Okay, wow. So we've been on quite a trip through some heavy-hitting sociology here. But let's bring it all back home. What does this all mean for us? How do we connect these big ideas about structure and culture back to our own lives? So to recap our journey, we started with this idea of a rigid system that imposes its will on students. Then we saw how active rebellion can paradoxically lead to the very same outcome. And finally, we landed on a much more nuanced view, where the system's structure and a person's individual culture aren't really separate things at all, but are deeply, deeply woven together. And now I want you to really apply this to your own life. Think back to your school. Picture the kids who are always held up as the good students. Was it truly just about them getting the right answers on a test? Or was there maybe something else going on? The way they spoke, the way they carry themselves, the cultural capital they brought with them into the classroom every day. Which leaves us with one final and maybe slightly unsettling question to think about. Beyond the official curriculum, beyond the grades on your report card, what were the unwritten rules that really decided who got ahead in your school? And how might those very rules have helped shape the future you're living today?